I am an elderly man, though the exact age is a mystery even to myself. I might be 100 years old, or perhaps even more, yet I cannot be certain, for I have never experienced the passage of time as other men do. My memories do not extend to childhood, and for as long as I can recall, I have remained fixed at the age of approximately 30. Though my appearance has not changed in over 4 decades, I sense an inevitable end looming, a true death from which there is no return. Despite having faced death twice before and still standing amongst the living, I harbor an inexplicable dread of the inevitable demise that awaits me. It perplexes me, this fear of death, especially considering my unique experiences. Yet it is this very terror that convinces me of my own mortality. Driven by this conviction, I have resolved to document the extraordinary chapters of my life and the peculiar circumstances of my demise. I cannot offer explanations for the inexplicable phenomena that have shaped my existence. Instead, I shall recount, in the humble words of a humble soldier of fortune, the peculiar events that unfolded during the 10 years I lay deceased in a cave in Arizona. This narrative has remained untold until now, and it shall remain unseen by mortal eyes until I have departed this earthly realm for eternity. I am aware that the average human mind struggles to accept what it cannot comprehend, and I have no desire to subject myself to ridicule and scorn. Though my words may seem fantastical, I am merely recounting the truths that someday, I believe, science will validate. Perhaps the insights I gained on Mars and the knowledge I have recorded in this chronicle will contribute to a swifter understanding of the mysteries of our neighboring planet. Mysteries that are still enigmatic to you, but have been unveiled to me. My name is not important, but for the sake of this narrative, you may know me as John Carter, or as Captain Jack Carter of Virginia. In the aftermath of the Civil War, I found myself in possession of a considerable fortune in Confederate currency and a captain's rank in an army that had been disbanded. I was a servant to a cause that had been vanquished, adrift without purpose or means. With my livelihood as a soldier rendered obsolete, I resolved to venture westward in search of gold, hoping to salvage my fallen fortunes. For nearly a year, I traversed the rugged terrain in the company of another Confederate officer, Captain James K. Powell of Richmond. Our perseverance bore fruit when, in the harsh winter of 1865, we stumbled upon a vein of gold-bearing quartz beyond our wildest imaginings. Fortune smiled upon us, but our meager equipment was ill-suited to exploit the riches we had unearthed. It was decided that Powell, being familiar with both the land and the requirements of mining, would return to civilization to procure the necessary machinery and manpower, while I remained to safeguard our claim. On March 3, 1866, we bid farewell as Powell set forth on his journey, leaving me alone amidst the rugged landscape, tasked with protecting our newfound wealth from the vagaries of fortune and the greed of others. The morning of Captain Powell's departure dawned with the typical splendor of an Arizona day, clear and beautiful. From my vantage point, I could observe him and his small entourage steadily descending the mountainside towards the valley below. Throughout the morning, intermittent glimpses of them would appear as they traversed rugged terrain, cresting ridges or emerging onto flat plateaus. My last sighting of Powell occurred around 3 in the afternoon as he disappeared into the shadows cast by the distant peaks on the opposite side of the valley. About half an hour later, I happened to casually glance across the valley and was taken aback to see 3 small dots in the vicinity, where I had last seen Powell and his pack animals. Though I attempted to reassure myself that all was well and that the dots were merely the distant forms of antelope or wild horses, my growing unease belied my attempts at self-assurance. Since our arrival in the territory, we had encountered no hostile Indians, leading us to become complacent and dismissive of the stories we had heard about marauding tribes. However, my experiences among the Sioux had taught me the treacherous nature of such encounters, and I knew the peril Powell faced against a cunning band of Apaches. Unable to endure the suspense any longer, I armed myself and set out on Powell's trail, determined to ascertain his fate. As dusk descended, I hastened my pace, spurred on by a sense of duty that had guided me throughout my life. By moonlight, I continued my pursuit, following the trail at a brisk pace until, nearing midnight, I reached the waterhole where Powell had intended to camp. To my dismay, the site lay deserted, showing no signs of recent occupation save for the tracks of the pursuing horsemen, which continued unabated. Convinced now that Powell was being pursued by Apaches intent on capturing him alive for torture, I urged my horse forward with reckless abandon, hoping to intercept the attackers before they reached him. My thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of gunfire ahead. Knowing Powell would need my assistance, I spurred my horse onward, pushing him to his limits along the narrow mountain trail. After what seemed like an eternity, the trail opened onto a small plateau near the summit of the pass. The sight that greeted me filled me with dread, an encampment of Indian tepees, surrounded by hundreds of warriors gathered around a central point of interest. Though I could have retreated unnoticed into the darkness of the gorge, the thought did not occur to me until later. In that moment, driven by a sense of duty, I pressed forward, fully aware of the danger that lay ahead. I don't consider myself a hero, for in the countless times I've faced death through my own choices, I've never consciously contemplated an alternative course of action until much later. It seems my mind is wired to instinctively propel me towards duty without the need for deliberation. Nevertheless, I've never regretted that cowardice isn't an option for me. In this particular instance, I found myself thrust into action almost instinctively. As soon as I caught sight of the scene unfolding before me, the warriors surrounding Powell, I didn't pause to think, but immediately drew my revolvers and charged headlong into the fray. With rapid gunfire and resounding whoops, I single-handedly incited chaos among the enemy ranks. The sudden onslaught convinced the warriors that a formidable force was upon them, prompting them to scatter in disarray. Yet, amidst the chaos, a scene of horror met my eyes. Powell lay prone, his body riddled with arrows. Though I knew he was likely already beyond saving, I couldn't bear the thought of his corpse falling into the hands of the Apaches for mutilation. With swift determination, I rode to Powell's side, hoisted him onto my horse, and spurred my mount onward. A backward glance confirmed that retracing my steps would be perilous, so I pressed forward, aiming for the pass on the far side of the plateau. Despite being pursued by enraged warriors hurling imprecations, arrows, and bullets, my rapid pace and the cover of darkness afforded me a narrow escape. My horse, guided more by instinct than my own direction, veered off course, leading us into a defile that climbed towards the summit rather than towards safety in the valley below. It was perhaps a stroke of luck that saved me from certain capture. The pursuing Indians, deceived by the unexpected turn of events, veered off in pursuit, their yells fading into the distance as I continued along the unintended path. Realizing my mistake, I halted at a vantage point overlooking the trail below, watching as the warriors disappeared from view. Knowing they would soon realize their error and resume the chase, I pressed on, eventually encountering a promising trail that wound along the face of a cliff. Following this path, I soon reached the mouth of a cavern. Inside, I discovered a sizable chamber, showing signs of past habitation. As daylight broke, I laid Powell's lifeless body on the ground, futilely attempting to revive him. Grief-stricken by the loss of my friend, I retreated further into the cave, finding solace in its shelter as exhaustion overtook me. Despite the pressing need to remain vigilant, fatigue weighed heavily upon me, and I succumbed to a deep, dreamless sleep within the cavern's depths.